I have raised doubts myself about some of the footage in that purported video from the University of Nairobi. I've raised very credible doubts.
We have a very big problem whereby there is an infiltration by political parties to the university.
This is Sidebar. I'm Larry Midowo. On tonight's show, there will be no NASA and Jubilee political talking points because there are no NASA and Jubilee representatives. Let me bring out my panel. This is an extraordinary time. Therefore, we need an extraordinary panel. Do you guys like that? If I start like that, you have to live up to those expectations. No pressure.
We are the ones they've been waiting for.
You're the ones we've been waiting for.
Man, I'm not entirely sure, man. I think Kenyans are done waiting.
Your understanding is...
I think the waiting is the thing that has everybody, like, on edge. Can you imagine a country that's been on edge for months?
And we'll be on edge for at least another 21 days. Dr. Njoki Ngumi is here with us from the Nest, and all the good things that you guys do over there, and have a fund. Also with us is Dr. Alex Owiti, who uses the term, which I like, public intellectual on his Twitter. And people are like, what does a public intellectual do exactly?
I just think. I'm just paid to think. That's the only thing I do.
All right, public intellectual. So we're going to tag him for the rest of the show as public intellectual, just to mess with people.
They're going to ridicule me for that.
Charles Kanjama, the advocate, is here with us. Always carries his constitution. And wow, somebody was asking earlier, Charles, I need to show you this tweet right now before we go on. And also here with us, Shefa Okore, political commentator, who's looking wonderful as always.
Thank you.
I need to bring up this tweet right now before I forget it, because you carry the constitution and it's important that you bring that up, because Nehemiah Rotich Kanjama, he asks, why is our constitution being interpreted by two political sides differently? Do you get that sense?
Yes, and it's expected. Every document that has several paragraphs provisions is capable of diverse interpretation. I like using the example of the Bible. Christians would understand. I think even for Muslims with the Quran, they may face the same problem. You have Christians reading the same Bible, interpreting the same Bible, but they disagree on certain, even very fundamental doctrines. What did Jesus mean? Because there are provisions or there are statements that may appear apparently contradictory, inconsistent. You may emphasize one and forget about another. And so you end up with different views of the very same document of the very same person. If you ask Larry, 10 people, you do a census and ask them what they think about Larry, they're likely to disagree.
Right.
Some will have a different view to others. It's the same with the Constitution. It's not purely a mathematical, scientific accuracy computation. It's a matter of interpretation, and different people have different perspectives. But really, we do have a mechanism for determining what should be the ultimate interpretation. There is a structure in place, and that involves the courts, which make the ultimate interpretation when there is a dispute. That one will stand the test of time.
Even the court's interpretation has been called into question, but in this period especially, even the sovereignty of the people has been, how NASA and Jubilee see the people being sovereign is very different.
Yes, and when you look at history, you realize that human society always faces these issues of contestation. The very idea of democracy, the very idea of sovereignty, it doesn't have just one meaning. People import into it their views, their prejudices, their biases, their perspectives, and that's why matters of human studies or humanities require people to have the patience to appreciate that there could be different perspectives, each with its own validity. I think there's this famous writer who spoke about the danger of a single narrative.
Right.
And that would be the danger if all Kenyans thought alike. If Kenyans all voted for one president the way Rwandans or Rwandese voted for Paul Kagame 98%, you'd not say that, wow, this is a fantastic democracy. Actually, you'd start wondering what is wrong. You'd start questioning. So actually, when there's some disputation, some discourse, what we call civic discourse, it's a sign of a healthy democracy, especially where it is not driven purely by biases, but also by intellectual and genuine engagement.
The danger of a single story was Chimamanda Adichie's fantastic TEDx talk as well. But you know, Njoki, in this season especially, it's not just people disagreeing on interpretation of the Constitution or whatever the law. It's also people having their own set of facts. People saying, this is my truth, and my truth is different from yours. Can there be two versions of the truth? Because we say, oh, the Supreme Court ruled this way. How NASA people see what the Supreme Court ruled and how Jubilee people see how the Supreme Court ruled are very different on the same ruling.
I think philosophers have been wondering about what truth is and what absolute truth is. And I think for us at this point in time, and I go back to the Kenyans are tired refrain, because we are so tired. We're so tired. People are tired of not selling. People are tired of being fired. We're just so tired. And if we go back to that tiredness and we ask ourselves, what is true there? The truth is that some people have the power to make their truths go further than other people do. The truth is that there are some people who can say a thing and they have this sort of platform that can allow them to say a thing, and it'll go around the country in an almost viral way, and it'll catch people and their emotions and their thoughts and their feelings and their issues about whatever is going on. I mean, I noticed when we were seeing the little clip of the 1 minute of what was going on, when Mr. Chebukati was speaking, he was standing in front of the Bomas board that said celebrating Kenya's diverse culture. Celebrating Kenya's diverse culture is one truth for a whole bunch of people. For another entire bunch of people, the idea of a diverse culture is problematic, because they want one tribe to be in front of others. One tribe apparently has the right from God to be in front of others if you look at it from one side of the divide. The other side of the divide are saying, it's our turn. You know what I mean? And all of these things now are the truths that are supposed to be competing. And when one person has the opportunity to push their truth on top of others, and then for others they actually gain by taking on these truths and now using militancy to push these things forward, then it becomes problematic. So we are not all equal people carrying our own versions of the truth, and that some of our versions of the truth are going to be harmful to others.
Okay. Dr. Witi, in an environment as polarized as this is, how is it even possible to find some consensus, which is what is necessary to get out of this political debacle that we find ourselves in?
I'm not sure that you might describe this as an exact instance or case of polarization. I think what we have here is an overabundance of dishonesty.
How so?
Because the two sides have just basically refused to be honest in terms of an attempt to broker some kind of a consensus and a compromise. And that's really the essence of a civilized society. That you can afford to disagree, but you cannot be so barbarically disagreeable as we've been seeing. And of course, there are different shades of truth and there are different versions of what people might understand as the truth, but there's also self-interest in the way that we understand the world, and then meaning is fundamentally constructed. Now, the elements of that construct of meaning must derive from a certain ideological basis. In real democracies, in real civilized societies. But in our case, the fundamental roots of the difference that we see is not ideological. It's vested self-interest. And a lot of it really plays out in very selfish ways and plays into this problematic cleavage that is ethnicity that really determines and drives our politics. So in my view, we have two men who have basically refused to be civil, who have put themselves before everything else. And it is just petty egos in what I might describe as a schoolyard of my thing is bigger than yours and I'm not listening to any story. I don't think that this stalemate should even persist for a minute if we sincerely wanted to move this country forward. These two gentlemen are not interested in moving this forward. As you say now, then you create that opportunity for polarization that is driven by nothing but pure self-interest, in my view. That basically obstructs an opportunity for even an engagement that explores consensus, that explores compromise. I don't think there are any hard positions here. At the end of the day, we can all go home, shake hands and sing Kumbaya. We can always agree. And I think that's the spirit that is lacking in the country at this point in time.
Is that how you see it, Shefa, that there's a lot of self-interest to the point that people are not even listening to each other?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Everybody wants power. And we're seeing it. It's evident. It's everywhere. And like he said, you literally just took the words out of my mouth. Egoism. There's a lot of it, and it's being flaunted. And you combine that with influence, like she's saying, and you can push further an agenda, and you can push further a narrative that completely sidelines everybody else. Like right now, who is actually talking about Kenyans? And I'm wondering, do they even know what Kenyans want? Do they even know what Kenyans are thinking? Do they even know where they are in regards to how their lives have been, you know, in the last couple of months? You know, like, does anybody have an idea of what an ordinary Kenyan, because everybody talks about this ordinary Kenyan, this voter, this mama mboga, because, you know, those are the normal words that we use to describe them. But who is actually talked to them and asked them, what do you think? How are you feeling? How have you been? The last time I checked on you was this day. This is, you know, we're heading into another presidential election. How is this dealing with you in regards to your life? Is anybody concerned about that? Because for me, where I come is I'm trying to understand where Uhuru wants what he wants, Raila wants what he wants. In the middle here, there's a gap. And the gap is nobody is addressing the fact that we are all questioning one thing, the process, how we got here, and how we should never get here again. And there are people who are arguing that maybe we need to feel this pain for a long time, you know, for an extended period of time. So when we sit back again on the table and discuss Kenyan politics, we realize it cost all of us something. Because right now, the reason why it's being outstretched, or the reason why it's still going on, is because only a few people are struggling. You know, the people who can afford not to struggle are not struggling. So they'll be like, Njoki, why are you bothered? You know, Alex, why are you complaining? But they don't understand our struggles. They don't understand that businesses are slowly shutting down. People don't have income.
It's not even
you know,
anymore.
Absolutely. I saw Mombasa, you know, add terrorism to that in Lamu, and then now hoteliers are complaining. Nurses are on strike. Is anybody talking about it?
Have been on strike for more than 100 days.
Absolutely. And the county, the governors are being told, fire them. You know, send them home. Mandera, Baringo, where was that? People are dying of malaria. But
the
no.
The malaria attack in Baringo is very serious.
Yeah, it's very serious.
Malaria in 2017.
Malaria.
Yes, malaria.
Yes.
Malaria.
And then I tweeted about it today because I saw it and I was in shock. And people thought I'm lying. Because how can we be dying of malaria in 2017 in Kenya? You know, after we are talking about government delivers, after we're talking about devolution, after we're talking about there's money in counties, and doctors are in hospitals, and then they forget. Okay. Doctors are in hospitals where there are no nurses, there are no clinical officers, there are no facilities, there's no money, literally. Well, I'm in shock.
Let's approach this from at least one specific instance. This happened yesterday. The Jubilee and NASA teams met with the IEBC. These are the statements that came out. They're very different statements. It's almost like they were in different meetings. Watch.
Between today and tomorrow, we shall publish what we have agreed with the NASA team so that we can move on with the major part of giving Kenyans the elections on the 26th of October.
Do not be cheated that NASA has some agreement with IEBC and that there is some progress that we are party to. We have no such agreement, and our faith in IEBC remains zero, which is why our political action plan must continue.
As a party, we have no conditions. We have no minimum conditions. We have no irreducible minimum conditions.
NASA's given irreducible minimums. That's what the Deputy President is referring to. Charles, your reaction?
I think what you are seeing, Larry, is called political brinkmanship, which means the political actors who are not ready to take anything apart from victory in the elections are ready to take Kenya to the edge of crisis. And if by bad luck one of them steps beyond the edge of the cliff of crisis and takes the country rolling down to the bottom in tragedy, then they will say too bad. What I would like though to say is that both the NASA coalition and the Jubilee Party have genuine concerns about some kind of electoral reforms that need to be done before the elections. We know that Jubilee side has taken the parliamentary approach, the constitutional parliamentary approach through legislation to try and deal with their concerns. We know that the NASA side has decided to take the approach of mass action or public pressure, engaging IEBC to deal with their concerns. There is a concern that even as they seek these genuine issues that they may be having, that there's also a lot of, as has been said, dishonesty and a lot of self-interest. But my biggest concern, Larry, is not so much the principles or the key political actors on both sides. My biggest concerns is the rest of the Kenyan people. both the people at the grassroots and even more importantly, the intellectuals, the professionals, because we are finding that they are getting as polarized as the political leaders. That basic consensus that is necessary for democracy to function, even the agreement that we should have elections on 26th of October, that elections should be free and fair, that both parties should be ready to win or lose. It seems we cannot even agree on those basics that are important for constitutional compact. And when the leaders have this concern because of political competition to win, winning is the thing above all other things that they are seeking, then it behoves other members of the society to take up those positions of trying to ensure that basic civic consensus that can allow the country to go forward. And there have been some groups that have tried to do it.
Is that even possible right now in the current environment? It seems to be so divided that that civic consensus you talk about is a dream.
I think we all can see that the only way we will get out of this situation is by holding free and fair elections and holding them soon. And even though there is a crisis about this issue, I think for me, I would say that as the people of Kenya, that should be our irreducible minimum. We hold free and fair elections, but we hold them within the constitutional
Hang on. NASA says they want free and fair elections. That's why they have irreducible minimums. Jubilee says they want to ensure those free and fair elections. That's why they've suggested these amendments to ensure that, one, there's no discrepancy between the electronic transmitted results and the ones declared at the polling station, etc. So they seem to want to arrive at the same place differently.
That's correct. And I think Kenyans have to warn both coalitions that if their political brinkmanship destroys the possibility either of having free and fair elections or of having those free and fair elections within the 60 days indicated by the court, that we are not going to take it kindly. I know the challenge is that many Kenyans are polarized one way or the other, but we have found institutions which have worked through their internal polarity and have been able to come up with common positions. I've personally been impressed by the statements by various church leaders. We know they come from different parts of the country. They may have different political inclinations, but they've been able to give united statements. We need to look for this, you could call them fair actors, not necessarily the fact that I call myself civil society makes me objective and neutral, but we need to look for these people who can offer leadership at this time that the politicians are in the middle of the game and they cannot also play the role of the referee. And I think Kenyans can identify the institutions that are able to do this. And key, very importantly, because of our constitutional compact, is the IEBC and the judiciary. These two institutions are the ones with the legal mandate to run elections and to arbitrate on electoral disputes. So that ultimately, whatever the parties say, if these two institutions give their verdict, we must compel them to respect that verdict.
I'll come back to you about this election amendment laws and how useful they are 21 days to the election. But Dr. Awiti, you respond to this. Daktari should call a spade a spade. NASA wants free and fair and credible polls, while Jubilee wants to sanitize electoral theft. Is that how you see this current political moment?
I think that's really unfortunate because that's what we are talking about, and those kinds of extreme characterizations are really problematic. You know, you can't say that NASA wants free and fair elections. Jubilee wants to sanitize electoral theft. I don't think there's any merit in that conversation. For anybody who's fair-minded and wants to have a progressive conversation in these times, that's really unfortunate. What I think, as Charles has said, there seems to be, in my view, some interest and desire to have free and fair elections. Now, what we have conveniently found, like Kenyans always do, we never miss an opportunity to find controversy and make things just completely complicated, is decided that at this time we will have two approaches to that. And so you will ask the question, were these conversations around legislative amendment really necessary at this point in time to help us get a credible election based on the annulment of the first election?
Right.
And what is the role of IEBC and what is the necessary conversation that would enable sufficient amount of comfort by NASA that the same IBC, let's just be realistic, you cannot disband this commission and actually reconstitute it in the time that we have. It's just not going to work. What are the necessary conversations around even some kind of oversight or even a council that comes from both sides that helps to basically reassure both sides that this is going to be fair? And I think Chebukati has said many times that they're really committed to deliver free and fair election. Now, he should be unshackled. There should be no intimidation. He should be left free, with the free reign, to basically reorganize his team around an election.
Giving irreducible minimums or amending electoral laws a month to the election?
You see, when all those memos were leaked and etc., and then his initial plan to basically say he was going to reconstitute the team that was going to manage the presidential election. And then we all came back and said, well, there will be no election without Chiloba. Not exactly in those terms, but that his role cannot be diminished. But I think he was making a decision as the chair of the commission to basically say, under these circumstances, I would like to reconstitute a team that then creates this. And then NASA goes on the other side and basically says Chiloba has to go. Jubilee basically is applying pressure to make sure that the team runs as is constituted, with the CEO playing the role that he has to play. Now that's the impasse that you create in a conversation when someone is really out of an honest position trying to find some consensus. And what we should have done, the politicians should have done, Uhuru and Raila, should sit down and basically say, can we be the adults in the house and calm down all this noise and basically work with, I would like to see 4 people in a room, Chebukati, Chiloba, Raila, and Uhuru, basically trying to lead this process. Because I think it's in Uhuru's interest that he is re-elected on a mandate that is credible. And for Raila, if he is to win this thing, it also has to be equally credible.
Okay. Shefa, related to what we were talking about, Peter Ndongo says NASA's mantra looks to be like power at all cost. Jubilee's motto, power at any cost. Clearly values-driven politicians are not yet born. So they all but want power, is what he's saying.
Of course, they do. I mean,
at any cost.
At any cost. But the thing is, isn't that the whole idea why we have laws? Is that the whole idea why we have a constitution? So that can be checked. Because, you know, when we have people who have absolute power, then these people can't be checked. These people are untouchable, right? And that's the reason why I talk about the people, and the people are completely insulated by the Constitution and by what is required within the electoral laws, leave alone the ones they want to amend. That's another conversation. The ones that are there now. Because I would understand why Raila doubts Jubilee's intentions with amending the laws, right? And I would understand that because Maraga said it very evidently. These elections are null and void. We cannot verify how we have numbers streaming in without forms. And that was a simple thing. For a layman to understand, we need a form to verify that when she counted 7 votes, this was where 7 votes came from. When he counted 15, this is where 15 came from. And on that basis alone, there are certain requirements that the judiciary put in place and said A, B, C, D needs to be done. So we don't come back here and complain about an election that people cannot verify where the results came from. Are those things being done? Are those things being followed? IEBC, what are they doing, right? I cannot also ignore the fact that nobody trusts Maraga. And I know that sounds very biased, coming from me saying nobody. And I know that people who say, okay, he's a good person, he did what he did. But if he did his job, would we be here today? We'd have a president sworn in. The country would have moved on. Somebody has to take responsibility of the fact that we are here because they failed at their job.
Meaning the IBC. So Chebukati, not Maraga.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody has to take responsibility. If it is Chiloba, he has to take responsibility of that. If it is somebody else, if it is, you know, if it is me, I have to take responsibility for that. Because we are here for a reason. And we're here because somebody failed at doing something that was so fundamental to a process that we all understand its consequences now for not having gotten it right. Because the whole idea of us going round and round and pretending like there are no valid reasons or there are no genuine concerns from both sides, I get why Jubilee wants to amend the laws. Their timing is absolutely suspect, right? I mean, you can't say we walk into an exam, 5 of us, and then one person fails, and the person with the most clout is the one who failed. So now the person who won, or the person who allegedly should have won, right, is talking about, okay, no, because this was supposed to favor me, then we need to figure out how these exams need to be done. Maybe I need lesser questions. Maybe I need the teacher marking my paper first and everybody else's last. It doesn't work like that. There is a process, and that process needs to be respected. And the fact that none of these people is talking about that process is worrying me.
Okay.
I wanna reflect on some of the things that that my colleagues here have said, and they're very important. I really loved what Alex said about the adults in the room, and the thing that I have observed is that there have been no adults. There have been children, as Alex said, insulting one another in public. There have been people who've been disproportionately punished. If we were going to punish everybody for shouting nonsense in the playground, let's punish everybody, not just some people from some places, which then now become suspect. And again, if we as Kenyans are encouraging this culture of name calling in the most barbaric sense,
but we know Sonko type. It's
absolutely disgusting, and it's completely unconscionable. These are not the things that should be happening. We're always here saying what is the example that we're giving to our children, and I really hate when people say what is the example that we're giving to our children. But in this case, it's so necessary, because if our children start insulting one another in playgrounds now, they can just say that it's because they saw so and so do it. They saw the governor do it. They saw the honorable member doing it. People are acting like dishonorable members now. It's absolutely ridiculous. The other thing is, I feel as though we need to see these things as layers, and if we de-escalate an almost undescalatable situation, the Kenyan who tweeted earlier saying that this is just, people are just power hungry, we are power driven, we are not values driven. I think that's particularly unfortunate, because I don't think it's true. All of these parties, these coalitions, Jubilee and NASA, entered this situation with values. Jubilee's manifesto was strongly leaning towards industrialization, strongly leaning towards strengthening the market and such things. NASA's, on the other hand, was leaning towards trying to understand what are the things that have created inequality in our society. How can we understand people a little bit better, so that now we can build people, so that we can build the nation. So again, we approach people coming at the same thing from different sides, and you can decide which side you want to lean towards. And people were saying before all of these shenanigans that this is the closest to strong political ideology that we have come in a very long time. And I thought that was very interesting. So for somebody to say now they're just being driven by, I don't think that's true, because they're still being driven by the values that made them create the parties that they have created. The other thing I wanted to say was with regard to, again, the 60 seconds and the amount of time that we gave to men talking in front of boards and men talking into microphones, and the 3 seconds we had at the end for children running away from tear gas. We saw a video the other day of babies, literal babies,
being tear gassed. Nursery kids.
Nursery school children being exposed to tear gas. We don't know what the health repercussions of those things are. Some of these babies could have been blinded. They could have had head injuries. People could have fallen, all sorts of things. It's it's crazy. And we are here still talking about principles, still talking about men who need to have better manners on behalf of the 40 million of us, when our children are directly suffering. I was wondering the other day about all our university students. When are they going to sit exams? How many weeks have they been out of school? How are their teachers going to catch up? Everybody who now has to have a shorter third term. When we say that we are a country that has a demographic dividend, so we have a really large number of youth, and that these youth, there's several of them that are in school, and so we are here talking about a future, but then we are denying people the chance to be actually living their future now. If we were a country of sensible people, we would say that nothing would get in the way of our children going to school, nothing would get in the way of our children learning. If for instance, if we suspect that people are being sketchy in as far as their mass action, and they run into a kindergarten to hide, we should expect our police to be better trained than to stand at the fence and throw tear gas in. They can go in and flush out people while protecting the people inside. We see these things all the time. We watch movies. We know these things happen. We have read that these things have happened in truth and in fact. But here we are, still, even the 5 of us right now, focusing our attentions on the shenanigans of a few, when the vast majority are suffering, and suffering greatly.
All right. People are already calling out this panel. If any of you want to respond real quick. The panelists are sanitized, so they look good with both Jubilee and NASA in the name of political commentators. Call a spade a spade. That is Steve G's.
This is the thing. This is the thing that we're saying, that Kenyans are tired.
Okay. Let me say this. Related, Kenjama.
Yes.
Lina, swift first. Why is she laughing?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Let me say
Let
something.
me respond. Let me read this as well so you can respond to them together.
Yes,
because
yes.
somebody else is also talking about that. I'm afraid I'll say it as it is. This is Lina. Your panel seems cowardly. None of them is willing to be forthright on the issue at hand.
You know, Larry, we speak as we are asked to speak. If you ask the right questions, we'll give you the right answers.
I think questions are not right.
I think what Kenyans are interested in really us talking about is that we have a very important constitutional exercise. It's an exercise that involves all citizens, at least all adult citizens who are registered voters. It's the fundamental expression of our sovereignty. Every 5 years when we vote for the president. There's sometimes a sentiment that comes across, especially from some members of the middle class who think that elections are too messy, that let's get rid of them, let's continue focusing on our lives. Because for some people in the middle class, and we may be part of that, our lives may be generally comfortable. Whether Raila or Uhuru is in power will not make us miss a loaf of bread in the morning. And that is a criticism,
that because you're all coming from a position of privilege, you can discuss ideology and you can discuss truths and post-truth, etc.
So Larry,
and others want a spade to be called a spade. They see an injustice having been done, and they want
nobody here is discussing post-truth.
So what I want to say is that there is a bit of legitimacy in the criticism, that it may be possible for us to sit on high chairs and rubbish the different political actors, and yet they are participating in a very critical exercise. It's political and it's messy, but it must be done. On the other hand, it is important that you have sober people who are able to mediate and moderate some of the excesses of those who are in the heat of the political moment. So we are not in the arena, and I think we're able to analyze the arena as spectators, with the mindset of spectators. We are not in the football field right now. We will give our verdict on 26th of October. My view, Larry, is that there are two critical issues, and that's what I've been wanting to say, that we need to focus on. And I'm going to call a spade, as has been requested. The first is the question of safeguards. NASA needs safeguards that the elections are free and fair. Jubilee needs safeguards that there will be no sabotage of the elections to have a fresh election. NASA are entitled to seek those safeguards from IBC. They need to know and to be assured that the electronic transmission system will not be played around with. Because don't forget, the Supreme Court made a finding, an adverse inference, that there is a possibility that this mechanism was played around with. They need safeguards that the manual forms will have authenticity. Don't forget, the Supreme Court again spoke about dubious authenticity of the forms. They may be asking for too much, but you can't just dismiss what they're asking for. And I think IBC, in the engagement with NASA, is trying to find ways they can give them safeguards that will be within the constitutional time frame and the laws at hand. On the other hand, Jubilee also needs safeguards. They are bitter. They think their victory was stolen from them. They don't want it to happen again. They have had NASA saying no reforms, no elections. They suspect that there is a bombshell, and some NASA people have been talking about how they will stop elections, whether it's sabotage or something else. So they need also safeguards.
So
and their safeguards, safeguards are from amending electoral laws to ensure that those things that happened before, where they feel the election stolen from them, don't happen, that the election takes place. The second is institutional integrity. I think we become so obsessive about individuals. We would like to, for example, lock up Uhuru and Raila in a room and imagine that they can fight themselves and come out and tell us who's the winner or what they have decided. I think it's a sign that we have very little trust in our institutions. And what we really need to do is to start upholding our institutions. We lionize individuals. When IBC does something, we say Chebukati. It's not Chebukati, it's a commission. It's not Chiloba, it's a secretariat. When the Supreme Court does something, we say Maraga. It's not Chief Justice Maraga alone. It is the Supreme Court and the judiciary. So we need to respect these institutions. Don't forget that IBC has people who may be politically inclined to Jubilee and some to NASA,
Okay.
the courts as well. If we respect institutions and their verdicts, we allow other players, parliament, the people to go to the streets if they want peaceably, but we ultimately say the decision of the institutions will be respected.
Okay.
We'll get out of this morass, because if NASA is unable to persuade IBC, too bad for them.
Okay.
If Jubilee is unable to persuade the court, too bad for it.
All right.
Ultimately, they can try to influence those things, but let the institutions do their job, and we respect the verdict of the institutions.
I have to go to break, but there are more meta tweets right here. Collins Jomba Buyala. Sidebar tonight is full of pretense, middle ground, and being nice. Offer solutions, guys. So that the people were totally saying, you know, you're not calling spade a spade.
Man.
But why do Kenyans expect us to be at each other's throats? But why can't they listen to reason and listen to people actually having an engaging intellectual conversation about issues at hand?
Shefa, hold that thought. Everybody hold that thought. Can I take a break real quick? Excellent. I'm going to take a real quick break right now on Sidebar. We're going to be right back. Welcome back to Sidebar. In fact, Njoki Ngomi was just talking about this before we went to break. The situation at the University of Nairobi where the students were smoked out and harassed, and Joseph Boynot came on NTV and did not apologize for that. He said they cannot condemn the police force based on a 3-minute video whose veracity he could not confirm. It happened on Sunday with Linus Kaikai. It was... Watching that interview was... I don't know...
Torturous.
Why do you say torturous?
It was painful. For me, especially as a former student of the University of Nairobi, who had seen some of the videos. It's true some of them were fake,
right?
But who had also listened to some of the genuine testimonies. It was really torturous. It was tragic. The total failure to interact with reality in terms of engaging on what really happened, blame shifting. I think it was unfortunate. One of the very unfortunate, you could call it, side shows or some of the things that have happened to people who really should not have been involved in the mix of it was what happened to the students of architecture, design and development.
Right.
And innocent people in class being beaten up by GSU. I actually felt sad. I felt sad for them, and I felt even more sad at the very glib denials of the Inspector General of Police. I really think we need to have a discussion on this issue, because it is tragic. Okay, before you respond, Joki, I just want to play the soundbite from some of the students we spoke to after that day.
We have a very big problem whereby there is an infiltration by political parties to a university. But us, we come clearly to say that we are really opposed to the political parties interfering with our studies.
Tunakemea vyama vya hapa Kenya kutumia wanafunzi ili kujinufaisha katika siasa zao.
Njoki.
I mean, you hear the youth of this nation saying that they want to be left alone to study, right? And then we have this entire situation where these things happen to them and everybody is out here denying it. First of all, I mean, even if I were to just step away from the sheer evil of saying that a thing did not happen when clearly it did. People were beaten, people were in hospital, it happened. So for us to come and say that it didn't means that somebody is lying, and we need to call out a liar. So that's number one. But if you were to say, fine, let's be objective, you know the Kenyans like saying objective, even at times when nobody should be objective. Nobody should be objective about lecturers and students being beaten up in a university. That's not a place where we can come and be objective. But if we were to be objective and ask ourselves, as Charles was asking earlier, whether this thing happened or not, whether the videos are verifiable, whatever, it's not just the videos that are evidence, it is people's bodies, it is witnesses, it is CCTV, it is several things that can be put together.
The Vice Chancellor, Professor Mbithi, said nothing of that sort happened at the university. We asked our students not to be incited by politicians.
I feel as though maybe it didn't happen to him, it didn't happen to his physical body, but if it happened to his students and he's saying this publicly, I think it is not only unfortunate, but it is evil.
I think there was a statement by Independent Policing Oversight Authority. It's a credible statement. Several of the videos are fake. There is no doubt about it.
Yes.
And it's part of the cancer of our Kenyan society, where we have too much fake news and fraudulent things. And the unfortunate thing is that when fake information comes, it tarnishes even the genuine information, which it shouldn't, because there's a lot of genuine information. There's a statement issued by the students and the Faculty of Architecture, Design and Development with genuine witness testimonies of what really happened. And this is part of the problem. I think one of the shameful things was to learn that it was probably the Vice Chancellor of the University of Nairobi who invited the General Service Unit personnel to the university. And
that's what the IG said on Sunday here.
Yes, and they actually came in to beat up students. And the students they came to beat up are not the students who are on the streets demonstrating. Definitely from the clips that you've played, Larry, even in the university you have two views. You have those who think that they are in the university only to study, and that is all that they are there for. But there are those who believe that the university is part of the society, that they should be involved in political advocacy and activism. You don't have a homogeneous student community, and I don't think it would be right to say that students should not be involved in matters politics, so long as they do them in the right way. But you also need to create space for those students who want to focus on their studies to do so without being harassed by GSU personnel.
I completely agree with Charles. I want to just clarify that earlier when I said these kids want to be left alone to study, and I completely agree. As a person who has achieved the age of majority, you have the right to be politically engaged in the same way that you want, exactly the way you want, in the way that the Constitution gives you permission to do. But then even when we use words like the VC invited the GSU into the space, we have to remember that until proven otherwise, any mass demonstration and mass action around this election is supposed to be peaceful. So people are supposed to be trying to engage in as far as peace is concerned. If there's a rogue element, as opposed to treating the entire mass like rogue elements, it is possible to flush out rogue elements.
Okay.
People know rogue elements by face. So I think we are this kind of blanket that we throw over university students. This is a historical blanket in this country of university students as problematic elements, as elements that are interested in causing chaos, destroying the CBD. I was in Form 1, I was hit by a stone that was thrown to my school bus by a student from the University of Nairobi. I ended up going to the University of Nairobi, and I am here talking on behalf of students from the University of Nairobi.
What is the weak shift as you respond that we've seen university students beaten up at the hall of residence, and then we've seen nursery school kids tear gassed? What kind of country do we live in?
Of demons, of beasts, claiming to be human beings, of upright beasts, because I don't understand why we are not even going mad right now. It's about that simple fact that children were tear gassed in school, and then the police spokespeople have said before that we only tear gas people who are, demonstrating violently or engaged in some kind of illegal way of protesting. And then I'm wondering, where is a safe place? Because a baby was clobbered in their home with their parents and died. Home is supposed to be safe. They died. Now we have toddlers who are in school being tear gassed within the confines of their school. Where do we draw the line? Because we need to call a thing, right? And we need to say we live amongst beasts who are out to destroy some of us, and completely without any apology. It was jarring watching the interview where somebody admittedly says, I do not understand what police brutality means. And there's evidence. And there are people right now. I know personally a student of Nairobi University who was dragged out of the hostel. And I want answers to that. Because sometimes I think we talk about issues in a very disconnected way, and we don't put ourselves, we immerse ourselves in that particular spot and ask ourselves, what goes through someone's mind before they actually single you out, slap you, make you duck walk, leave alone what they're saying is real or fake. What real is there and that happened? Can we address that? These police officers, we have their faces on camera, right? We can see them and we can say, oh, this looks like the guy who did this and that. How come there are no consequences? You know, we can't have a country where people just do what they please to people whom they know cannot defend themselves, and then let it just happen and walk away. Okay. Because it is not right. You know, I don't understand how we are in this place where we still talk about police brutality as if there are no laws that govern us, as if there is not a proper way in which police are supposed to be trained to either restrain, arrest, get people to a place of now you did this and now these are the consequences of your actions, right? There's always violence. There always is violence. We have seen a couple days ago, weeks, some people protested on Thika Road. Where was that? Not even a single tear gas canister was launched.
And windscreens were being smashed.
Yes, and they caused all sorts of havoc. What is the difference? Because the lie is we want to assume that laws are applicable to all of us when laws are applicable to other people and not other people. Can we define these things? Okay. Because these are fundamental things. How come when you speak, I force myself to silence you? When she speaks, I accept it and it's okay. Yet we claim to be one Kenya. It's not right.
Larry, where was this kindergarten school? Where is it?
In Kisumu, in Nyalenda.
And if we ask ourselves...
And the baby who died, Nyalenda.
Yes.
And if we ask ourselves about the places where there are nursery schools that will never be tear gassed,
yes,
we have very clear answers to those questions.
Exactly.
And so when we view, and rightly so, the police as an arm, as an extension of the arm of state, yes, and we see them interrupting a school process in this violent and tragic and unspeakable way,
yeah,
we cannot undo that, we cannot deny it, and still we are. There are
beasts amongst
us. There are almost no words, and yet there are words. people should be punished. People should be blamed. The state should take responsibility. If it's because also we know how these things are run, that somebody gives orders, somebody okays these things to happen. People stand back and then tear gas canisters not thrown because somebody feels like throwing a canister. You're following an order.
How the VC allowed, invited, like come to my house.
Does the university not have its own internal security?
Exactly.
And did that internal security fail on record?
These are things we need to ask, and he needs to come clear. And even when he said, I am shutting, you know, the Senate has shut down the University of Nairobi. I was in the University of Nairobi, and there were protests during my time. No policeman or woman ever got into the school compound. How are they getting in now? Who okayed this? How did this become right? And then they have audacity to say the Senate has shut down the university because of insecurity reasons. Should we just be open and say they need to shut down the university for lack of leadership? Because leadership has failed.
That they are unable to keep the students safe.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Wichi, somebody says, Peter Mirez, let's be fair. Hit the nail on the head. We're in this mess because IBC failed. The media went silent and we're here.
You see, that's the point that Chief was making. I think what astounds me is that we have not had a national conversation about what went wrong on August 8th. We have refused to completely come to terms with the fact that...
We've had that conversation almost constantly.
But look at the dominant conversation. Look at the dominant conversation.
Jubilee lenses.
Well, Jubilee thinks, Uhuru said very clearly that Maraga's ruling amounts to judicial coup.
Yes.
Okay? And he said many things in English in front of his official podium and gone off on the campaign trail and said completely different things. If you look at his surrogates, they say completely different things that basically, as Charles said, undermine the integrity of our most fundamental institutions. The same thing with Raila Odinga. What they say about IBC completely denigrate these institutions. Goes back to the same thing we're seeing in the police. And as Charles said, you know, it is one thing to say it's a good thing to respect our institutions and give them time to actually do what they need to do. But these interests and this blatant disrespect of institutions, and sometimes you wonder, if Boynet speaks like he speaks, where is he, the professional policeman, who is the Inspector General? Where is he taking orders from someone else? And one thing, the police is a civil formation. The police is not a paramilitary operation. And to have to walk around with military shoulder rifles and shoot people on the streets, that's supposed to be the army. Are we in a state of war? But you see, the thing is, IBC messed the election. That's for sure. And Maraga basically said that. Those irregularities and illegalities that compounded all the chaos that obtained around the election, who runs the election? It is IBC. Therefore, blame falls squarely at the doorstep of IBC, led by Chairman Chebukati. We have refused to accept that there are certain fundamental changes and reassurances that must be made. And
back up. If there are changes, one, you're blaming Chebukati for what happened on August 8th.
Absolutely. He ran the elections.
So are you saying that Chebukati should be removed before the new election?
No.
Because that has been the prescription by one half of the political equation.
But that's not what Mr. Maraga said. Mr. Maraga basically said that there were irregularities and illegalities that make it even difficult to verify the election and consequently even determine who won the election. So in their view, the election was null and void. Now, what we needed to find out is then have some kind of forensic audit of all of the processes. And I think Mr. Chebukati, being a decent Kenyan like I suspect he is, should have basically been given a free hand to lead that process because he knows his organization. And then come back and say, here is what we found and here's what we're going to do. No, but he wasn't given time. Right? I'm on his side now. He wasn't given time to basically come up with that because the barrage of chorus and all of that went through the thing, it just basically polluted the well.
How can you say Chebukati should be given time to set his house in order when you just said moments ago that you blame him for what went wrong on August 8th? I
blame him for what went wrong on August 8th, but he also is the person who can fix it. If you remove him at this point in time, how is it going to work? And he's also he admitted in that memo that was leaked, there were certain, about the 12 things that he said should have been fixed that went wrong with the election. He went ahead and decided that he was going to reconstitute the commission in so far as managing the elections were concerned. we couldn't let him.
So taking that forward, Jubilee is trying to fix that, at least in their view. That's why they've come up with the election amendment laws. The bill is now under public discussion, and it comes up again in Parliament on October 10. I think that's Tuesday.
I think what Jubilee is trying to do is to fix what they think was the loophole that got the election annulled, which they basically said if there are irregularities and illegalities, there should be proof by the petitioner that they were substantial enough over time to change the outcome of the election. Because what Maraga basically said is that, look, this thing is governed by a constitutional provision, and there's an act, there's a law that basically governs it. If you don't meet those minimum threshold requirements, then I will throw the thing out. But Jubilee now is saying that it is not just on the face of the irregularities and illegalities that an election can be annulled. There has to be proof beyond reasonable doubt that those could have overturned the outcome. Because that's one thing. And then the other one is that the person who holds the position of the chair, the position of the chair, does not necessarily have to be qualified to be a judge in the Supreme Court. Right. Basically saying lawyers should not be the only people who can run this thing. Now, that's the malice that somebody might read in this thing. Why now? Are those things in any way to do with the reason why the election was annulled? I don't think so.
To respond to that,
I don't
why
think
now, Kanjama, really quickly? Why now? People are reading mischief in the timing of this amendment.
Larry, I am not the spokesman for Jubilee.
I know, but I
will explain.
You wanted.
I will explain. I will explain in my mind.
As amicus or sidebar, because the Supreme Court didn't accept your friend request, but we accepted your friend request.
I'll advise you what I think is Jubilee's concerns. And the first thing I will say is that...
First, before you do that,
yes.
Do you, as somebody who you don't hold brief for Nassau Jubilee,
yes.
As an ordinary advocate, do you see anything unusual about the timing of these amendments?
No, actually I don't.
Okay, go ahead.
We talk so much about Chebukati and forget he's a member of a commission with several officers and so on. Also, we talk very much about Maraga. We forget that he's part of a majority judgment. Don't forget there was a minority opinion by two judges. And the one, especially of Justice Njoki Ndung'u, which was very long, was also very hard-hitting. It would be, I think, dishonest to completely wipe out the concerns that were expressed in the minority opinions. Don't forget that Jubilee believes that the minority opinions should have carried the day.
Right.
They accept the reasoning of the minority opinions, and they feel that the majority did a disservice to Kenyans. But I've not finished.
Charles,
yes.
Do you think that that minority opinion really underlines the spirit and intent of these amendments that are being introduced at this point in time? That it's addressing some of those things that Njoki actually said.
Yes, exactly. In fact, the purpose of these amendments is driven by the spirit of the minority opinions. Judge Njoki Ndung'u said that Parliament needs to consider some amendments to the law. This is something which, when one is a lawyer and one has interacted with this kind of situations before, one knows that this has happened previously, where judges have made decisions and then legislatures all over the world have been unhappy about the decisions that have been made, have sought to address them.
Okay.
In America recently, you had the decision of the Supreme Court which upheld Obamacare, and you can see that the Republican Party, when they got into power through President Trump, have been spending the last few months trying to unravel Obamacare because they don't agree with that. It's normal. And for me, what I would say is this. You have three key arms of government: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. They're meant to check and balance each other. You cannot say that the moment the judiciary says something, that can never be changed, because ultimately the power belongs to the people. So the Jubilee side believe that the majority decision worked an injustice on the Kenyans. They believe that the majority decision changed the law from what it was before, and they want to address that and reverse those changes.
Have you looked through those amendments they propose?
All of them.
And do you support, for instance, that they're calling for complementary mechanism of identification of voters and transmission of results? They say they want to amend Section 24 of 2011. No election shall be declared to be void by any reason of non-compliance with any written law relating to that election if it appears the election was conducted in accordance with the principles laid down in the Constitution and the written law.
Okay, let's go step by step. The Supreme Court in the majority decision says that Section 83 of the Elections Act, which is the one that talks about irregularities affecting the outcome or affecting the question of the Constitution, has a key word which is or, and they use something called disjunctive interpretation. They say these are two different limbs, and each of them should be interpreted independently, so that if the elections were not conducted in accordance with the Constitution or the electoral law, it doesn't matter what was the eventual outcome or perceived outcome. Even if you won by 10 million votes, it doesn't matter, the election will be nullified. And then the Supreme Court says that that is the meaning of the word or. But then they compare the Kenyan Act, Section 83, with the provisions of other countries, including 5 or 6 African countries, where instead of using the word or, the statute has used the word and. And they say that in the case of those other countries, because it was conjunctive, then the election would only have been overturned if it had affected the result. But in Kenya, because the Election Act says or, it will not be overturned. Justice Njoki, who does the minority opinion, on the other hand, disagrees. She says that from the decision of Raila versus IBC in 2013 and several other cases of the Supreme Court, they have interpreted the two phrases conjunctively, so that this is a departure from the previous interpretation. Regardless of who is correct, the Jubilee side thinks we are the ones as parliament who have the power to make law. It's not the judiciary. We want to clarify this by changing all.
And do you think these amendments clarify those kind of gray areas the Supreme Court ruling brought about?
They clarify in favor of Jubilee, and that's why they've brought them.
Do you think they're problematic, as NASA has said? The timing, most specifically, but also what they intend to do?
I think I agree with the diplomat's statement, who said that the timing and the fact that it is one-sided introduces problematic elements. But let me put it this way. Both sides, Jubilee and NASA, are introducing problematic elements. NASA have their unilateral minimum reforms. Jubilee have their unilateral minimum reforms. As institutions, if these two sides can't work together, we have to see, or the institutions have to see, what of the minimum reforms that Jubilee want can we allow? What of the minimum reforms that NASA want can we allow? But I don't think it would be right to say, let's trash all of NASA's minimum reforms. Also, I don't think it would be right to say, let's trash all of Jubilee's minimum reforms. Let me give you an example, Larry. Jubilee is worried that on 24th of October, it is possible for Chebukati to resign as the chairman, and I think one of the panelists referred to that issue. What happens if he resigns? Will the elections be postponed for another 60 days?
That's why they deleted this part. Unless a unanimous decision is reached, a decision on any matter before the commission shall be a majority of the members present and voting. So they want a simple majority.
No, it has always been simple majority. If you look at the previous law, it was always simple majority. I think what they are concerned about, that's why they defined chairman to include, in the absence of the chair, the vice chair. That's why they changed the qualifications.
People find that problematic, that any other commissioner, the vice chair or any of the others can still declare president.
Assuming Chebukati resigns on 25th of October, Larry, what happens after
that situation has never happened with any previous electoral commission.
There are many things that have never happened that are happening now. We are living in an unscripted time, and that's why people are looking for certainty. I'm really listening to what Charles is saying, and I'm like, I like this thing where they are creating in a contingency. In the event of this, there's this. In the event of this, there's this. There's no script.
Right.
But there's no script.
I want to play for you what the senators James Orengo for NASA and Kithure Kindiki of Jubilee have been saying about these amendments.
They have reached a level where they feel that they can do anything and change anything, including the Constitution, through the back door.
If you are a minority and you fear an agenda that doesn't favor you is being introduced, the recourse is not to threaten the majority or throw tantrums. The recourse is to reach out through the established leadership in the houses we see if you can get some consensus. You can do that through debate in the House, trying to convince. If they convince us some of the amendments are not good.
Is this changing the Constitution through the back door, as James Orengo says? I'll start with the lawyer, obviously.
Larry, I think when we talk about statute violating the Constitution, a friend of mine was asking me recently, are they violating the Constitution? And I answered that the problem is our Constitution is interpreted sometimes in ways that you cannot foresee in advance. So that it's not just a question of saying direct violation, this provision says of the Constitution, do not do this, and the statute has said you can do this. It's an issue of interpretation.
So do you believe, again, are they changing the Constitution by the back door?
I think they are trying to avoid changing the Constitution. I think several provisions that are in that amendment bill if the matter goes to court, will be upheld, as happened with the Security Laws Amendment Act 1 or 2 years ago. Remember, it was very contested, but when the matter went to court, several provisions were upheld. But it is possible that there will be some that may fail the constitutional test as far as the court is concerned.
Shefa, between what Professor Kithure Kindiki is saying, or the senior counsel Orengo, changing the constitution by the back door or trying to threaten the majority, as Kithure says, what do you relate with more?
I just have questions. It's not even about relatability. It's about questions and concerns, because I'm just drawing from what Kanjama has said, and he's explained it very elaborately. So Jubilee is not trying to change the constitution. What are they trying to do? I'm wondering.
They're trying to change the election law. The election law is founded on the constitution, but is elaborated in the election statutes. The Elections Act, the Elections Offences Act, the Campaign Financing Act, Political Parties Act, and so on.
Which is great. So now, whatever they're trying to change, the electoral laws, which is hinged on the constitution, does not really favor anybody else apart from Jubilee. Right? Because they've said it is heavily Jubilee leaning, and that was one of the red flags. Yeah, like the red flags of, okay, so everybody else feels excluded, right? So how do you get people included? And Kindiki is talking about, okay, you can debate, you can reach out and whatever.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, NASA also comes up with theirs because now they feel they're excluded and they're a minority, and that favors only NASA people. So even with the amendments that are coming from both sides, or reforms, or whatever they want to call it, which one actually is inclusive for Kenyans? Because everybody's talking about them, right? Jubilee's talking about, okay, we want to change this for us. NASA want to change this for us. Then some of us who are not NASA Jubilee, where are we?
My feeling is this: when NASA implement reforms for their benefit, some of them will benefit Kenyans as well, even though NASA may be thinking primarily of themselves. Likewise with Jubilee. When Jubilee changed the law to favor them, it may also favor Kenyans in some matters, because some of them will also, either coincidentally or because of the way they are structured. So we need to do an objective analysis of all of them and take away from our lens the idea that this one was brought by NASA, this was brought by Jubilee, objectively analyze all of them. It's difficult, but
is it already a problem that when it comes to matters of this grave magnitude, there is space, which of course I know it is allowed by the Constitution, for people to start working around, okay, let's fix it for us, right? Because it means the fixing for us will not stop. Because things will never be favoring you, right? Yes. And at some point you'll be like, okay, so what do we do now? Because we'll eventually change the entire Constitution.
The thing you are saying, Shefa, if I'm hearing you correctly, and which Kanjama has alluded to in a very, I like what he said, even though for me it's very optimistically objective, is that Shefa is saying that this thing should benefit Kenyans. And that if truly these parties were acting in the interest of Kenyans, then they would not be working in party silos to do separate reforms, and then each of them trying to convince us that it is their exclusive reforms that are going to be helpful for all of us. Because now we are going back to, it's almost a campaign, but on the basis of electoral reform. So they're saying that our version of this electoral reform on this new election that we are all now having to go through is the one that's going to carry the day.
So our amendments or our irreducible minimums?
Yes. As opposed to, can everybody just get together, we reform this thing, because now it's the two of you who have us in this fix.
Exactly.
So get together, fix this thing together, both of you be happy with whatever is going to happen. The race happens on the 26th, with chairman, vice chairman, whoever, whatever people decide, right?
It's not possible.
And then Kenyans wake up the next day with a president, and then now we can continue having the fights. We can continue having the fights of why are our high schools burning down? Why are our university students being kicked out of school without finishing their curriculums? Why are we having such deep problems in the healthcare sector? Those are the fights we need to be having. Instead of sitting here talking about the nonsense in the silos.
Whose reforms from both sides addresses the issues that were raised that led us to a null and void election.
Okay, Dr. Witi, that's not possible because, like we had at the top of the show, NASA has irreducible minimums, and their confidence in the IEBC, Raila Odinga said, remains zero. The Deputy President said, we have no irreducible minimums, we have no conditions, we're ready to do this thing.
So here is what David D said a couple of days ago. He said that it is suicidal for Jubilee to go into this election with what NASA describes as irreducible minimums. It is equally suicidal for NASA to go into this election
with amendments.
With amendments.
Suicidal for who?
For both of them. That
is it actually suicidal for Kenyans?
Basically, well, that's how they kind of split the thing. And now there's no Kenyans, there's just Jubilee and NASA. And whether the Kenyans live in those precincts is for someone else.
As you respond, Shikuku Francis, currently there's nothing like being neutral. You're either subscribed to NASA's philosophy or Jubilee philosophy.
I don't agree with that. But I think what is really problematic is how deliberately we've polarized the conversation. Because I think what is, in my view, just inexcusably polarizing is for the president's side to basically say that they will introduce amendments into the House that basically capture the spirit of the dissenting opinion by Justice Joki Ndungu. Okay? And after the president had actually said that he disagrees with the ruling, though he tries to respect it. I think that's the injection of the malice that I think is untimely. And as Jokia said, is where is the opportunity for some kind of a balanced conversation about what we find contentious about the constitutional provisions, which, as you've said, are problematic in the interpretation. And these 5 judges decided to take it one way, and the previous election petition in 2013 interpreted it completely differently, and then created 2 different outcomes. Okay? Now, I think the mischief also is on Raila Odinga to insist on these reducible minimums to the extent that they are not achievable in the time that we have. And that there is a need for a conversation that actually finds a compromise. Even though Charles would disagree and basically say that it's not about Uhuru and Raila sitting together, but I think they're really consequential figures in the political process. That if they came together and basically said, look, here's what we want to move the country forward. Strip this thing of those ego considerations and basically say, can we, for the first time, put the country first? And as we're basically saying, the economy is shutting down. It's going comatose. And it's going to hurt everyone.
Could I say something?
Yes, sir.
First of all, I think as Kenyans, we need to be ready. If we can't get Uhuru and Raila in one room, which appears to be the case at the moment, to move forward and construct our country electoral process without them or with them on the sidelines. I think if we have so much focus on getting 2 people into a room, it's like the 2 people are carrying the entire country. The reality is that there are 45 or 46 million Kenyans, and each of them is playing a part. Of course, these 2 are the most influential. But I think you'll find in advanced democracies the ability to negotiate or move beyond 1 or 2 individuals. And you find that that's the difference between the developing countries where one individual or another is so fundamental, and if they decide to do the wrong thing, the country collapses, breaks down. That's a sign of fragile democracy. But I wanted to respond to the person who has commented about everyone being either Jubilee or NASA,
yes,
and the
there's no
impossibility
neutrality
of neutrality. And Larry, I've been thinking that the 2 great ills that Kenyans are facing in their political conversation in the last few weeks and months. One is what I call confirmation bias, not myself, several people have called it that way. Confirmation bias means you already have a predisposition and you assume that the other person, you look for evidence that supports your view, and you always very quickly discount facts that disagrees with you. So you find many viewers, even many politicians, even many thinkers, the moment they get a piece of evidence that agrees with their political inclination, they shout very loudly about it. When something else comes that disagrees, they don't even notice it. It's like they're blind. And it's amazing. For me, among my colleagues in the legal profession, I've found this, which is very tremendous, that we may be discussing a legal issue, and you find people who've been trained, they have the same legal training. Some are completely blind to some legal provisions, and the others to another set of legal provisions. It's amazing. I would like to have a debate as the chair of LSK Nairobi branch, where I call several lawyers, and we just have a go for 3 or 4 hours discussing the legal issues around these elections, the Supreme Court decision, and I think it will be very enlightening. But there's a lot of partisanship. That's confirmation bias. The second ill, Larry, that I've found Kenyans are engaging in this process is what I call projection. Not myself, many people do. It's psychological projection. You assume that everyone else is like you. If I may give an example of psychological projection, if you're a thief, you assume everyone else wants to steal from you. If you're a liar, you assume no one else is honest, no one tells the truth. If I'm alcoholic, I assume everyone else is drinking alcohol, even though in secret. Psychological projection is dangerous, and it's what leads to these generalized statements that no, everyone has a hidden view, no, everyone is a mole or something or the other. They lack the inability, to attribute honesty to others and an attempt to be balanced is because those who do it are probably among the most partisan people, and they don't believe that there are any other people save themselves in their partisan cocoons.
It's interesting you say that, because about confirmation bias specifically, Amayo Babu says, Kanjama is interpreting those provisions selectively. I'm reading to the extra flavor.
Exactly.
Wait, before we finish. Because he is Jubilee, getting Dr. Muguna so can hear more than we judge.
Wow. You see, that's the point. Let's
state your point.
And the point is this.
Question, Kanjama, are you Jubilee?
Look, I'm a professional who represents clients who are in Jubilee. Some were in ODM, some were in Wiper. In my personal and professional life, I have taken stances and positions that at one time favor one side, at another favor the other, and sometimes they are against both coalitions. The challenge, though, is that majority of Kenyans voted, and when you voted, whether you voted for Jubilee or for NASA, there is sometimes a secret bond that is developed at the ballot box. And my view is that even
what?
Wait, what?
This is like a poem.
A bond. It's a secret bond. You see, your vote is secret. No one sees your ballot. You may be quiet about it, but if you cast a ballot, there's some kind of like attachment that develops, and that is why, in my view, and I've expressed this in some circles, that there are some people in this country who really need to avoid going to cast a vote in the presidential election, because they play a very critical role. One is the commissioners of IBC, because we don't want them to develop any secret bond. The second is the judges of the Supreme Court. And I hope that in the fresh election, I will not see any of them casting a vote, because you don't want them to have that secret bond. For the rest of us Kenyans, if you voted for either Jubilee or NASA, you may find that there is an inclination, but it is possible for us to be self-critical, to rise beyond the fact that I cast a ballot for so and so or the other.
Okay.
And lastly, let me say, Larry, that there's a group of Kenyans, and I'm in that category, thankfully, who are ready to change the vote or switch the vote from one candidate to another based on an assessment of each candidate's merits.
All right.
And that is what we need to have. The less of six-piece voting, the less of this approach of lifestyle voting, where from the moment you reach the age of majority until you die, almost from the cradle to the tomb, you've only voted for one party or one affiliation. You have never had the experience of voting for somebody who is opposed to your ethnic, I don't know, demigod.
All right.
Then that is the problem we have. And I think the more Kenyans do that one, the more they'll develop the ability to be self-critical and even critical of any coalition or political position.
Njoki.
I've been struggling with the idea of mature democracies, especially because we have seen democracies that we would have otherwise described as mature in this world degenerate swiftly, to the point where we are struggling with the same things, and you're like, but we got multi-party all of a few years ago, and some of them have been multi-party democracies for centuries.
Plus years, yes.
But the struggles right now are the same. So, like, for me, I think we have to, and again, I want to call Charles with this objectively optimistic. When we say that we have to move beyond putting these two men in a room, I think the visual and the symbol of these two men in a room agreeing will be very healing for Kenyans.
So we need to put Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta in a room.
When we are here, there's that entire, there's all the other Kenyans who've just shut out this entire conversation and are just saying peace, 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 peace. Yeah. This, even putting them in the room, will make even the Kenyans who are saying peace, 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 without even engaging on the political front, even those Kenyans now will say now things are moving. Yeah. In the sense that we are here with people saying 10 million strong, 12 million strong. There's some people who gain dignity and identity by being part of this 12 million strong, 10 million strong. There are people who voting a particular party means certain things.
Yes.
For your family, it means certain things. For your community, it means, and not even just your ethnic community, but the community where you live. It means certain things about who you're saying you are when you vote these things. And this goes back to the values that we were talking about earlier. What values does Jubilee stand for? What values does NASA stand for? So for some people, identifying with these parties has a very strong, it has a very strong meaning for them in their thoughts, in their hearts, in their minds. And so when these people, regardless of the different sides of the divide, and we've been saying both sides of the divide, we're going to hate that phrase in the coming months. If someone says both sides of the divide to me in November or December, I'll run from the room screaming. But in as far as both sides of the divide now, the thing that Kenyans do not need is a divide. What we need is an election. We need votes to be counted. We need IEBC people to sign forms and hand them over with handover forms from A to B to C.
Yes.
So that, and then we need to know that if Larry is a presiding officer in constituency X and he calls with this number and he calls me, I receive that number as it is. Like, we don't need to be thinking about all of these things. So that was one. The second thing is electoral fatigue.
Right.
And the fact that we've not been talking about what that has meant. The country has been kind of on tenterhooks since April, let's just be honest. We were waiting for August to end so that things can go back, at least we redeem the last quarter. That has not happened. And so here we are looking towards having an election at the end of October.
Yes.
And that we've been in this kind of what one of my friends has called the pre-exam state, where you are studying. The questions are not, there's none. It's just stress. And for me, this kind of stress is the thing that's now contributing to people's heightened emotions about neutrality that feels like it's not helping the situation. People want you to be partisan. People want you to come over to their side so that they can feel like they can trust you.
Right.
And the last thing I want to say is about trust. Remember that we are coming from a couple of years of secrets, of shenanigans, of nonsense, of disappearing public millions, of what have you, this, that, the other, of cases that have come, not been explained, suddenly disappeared, people who've been tied to scandals, who disappear and then reappear later. Like, we are really done. And so when these shadows of this same nonsense now comes and attacks our electoral process, it ties together with all the mistrust that has already been boiling. And people have really had enough.
Okay, to conclude, two interesting questions that are related. I want all of you to answer, starting with Shefa. Howard Mai, how does implementing NASA's demands hurt Jubilee? And Eric Muraguri, how do the new amendments bill disadvantage NASA? So, if we implement NASA's reducible minimums, how do they hurt Jubilee? And two, if the amendments bill that Jubilee has proposed goes through, how does that hurt NASA?
I mean, we've already answered that, because first of all, we understood the fact that Jubilee's amendments or proposed amendments to the electoral laws are very Jubilee-leaning, right? And it's very exclusive to them as Jubilee, and it leaves everybody out. So that hurts everybody else who is not Jubilee. So if you're all here and we're not Jubilee, that means that it doesn't represent our voice or our values or the fact that we exist. And if NASA's proposed minimal whatevers only focuses on NASA and not on the people, which of course Jubilees also should focus on the people, then it locks everybody out. So it means everybody is talking about themselves, and that's what we were explaining, that there is now a vacuum in between where anybody who does not belong to the two is now left out in the open and wondering, where do I belong? Because these people are fighting for themselves, and some of us don't belong to either. And then I need to clarify something about having a conversation and not seeming to be leaning towards any particular party. There's nothing wrong with belonging to NASA, the coalition, or belonging to Jubilee, the party. There's absolutely nothing wrong. But what is wrong is when people assume that neutrality does not mean involvement, because neutrality does not mean that. Just because I'm neutral doesn't mean I don't involve myself in the everyday shenanigans of this country. And I call them shenanigans because they are. Because because we have people in positions who, of course, absolutely ignore the whole idea of Chapter 6. Does anybody even know Chapter 6 exists? That's why we have lawbreakers as lawmakers. That's why they can decide, today I want to change the laws, and decide everybody drinks tea from their hands and not cups anymore. And they don't understand why we got to where we are. Because we need to know that we got here as a process. And the process is we've been failing every single moment because we have refused to accept that we are the problem. As not just people, as not just participants in processes, but also in our choice of leaders and the people we allow in places where we expect to go.
Okay.
Because there's no way, like you said, disappearing money, they talk about missing. I love the term stolen. Because missing means money woke up and decided, let me go to this street.
And lost
then I
its way.
lose direction and I'm like, I'm lost and I'm 6 billion. You know, it doesn't happen. People stole. Yeah, you know.
Someone will find you.
Exactly. Like Google where I am, my location, find my 6 billion is walking down the streets to Larry. But yes, they missed it. You see, these are things that we walk around and we make fun of, but they are very serious things. Thieves are in offices, public offices, powerful positions, and then we expect that more money should not be lost. And then the same lawbreakers are in positions of legislation. What do we expect? Our laws will be better, or our laws will get worse?
I think the question of our fellow Kenyans that are asking on Twitter, what does the law mean for these people? What does it mean for these people?
If we implement reducible minimums, how does Jubilee get affected? If we implement the reforms, how does NASA lose?
I think we need to zoom out, as it were, and look at Kenya as a whole, beyond two parties. The fact remains that Jubilee and NASA were not the only injured parties by this election. Exactly. Kenyans were injured by the fact that we had one of the most expensive elections in the world that did not work. So essentially, we poured money down a drain. Like, if we were looking at it as an investment, it was a failed one. And that now we have to throw money at a thing that failed before and hope that this time it's going to work. Okay? Somebody will disagree with maybe that analogy, and that's fine. But they were not the only injured parties. The people of Kenya were injured. Our taxes were injured. All of these things. And so when we talk about reforming electoral law, and at a point in time when there are two primaries who are key, and whose agreement in this process is key to making sure that this process is as seamless as possible, then they need to be in the room together. And so when we ask the question, this person A's reforms, will they help person B, when it's very clear that person A is working in person A's interest and person B is working in person B's interest? We need persons A and B to work in the collective interest, both their own and ours. So they need to decide what about person A and B interests can be in the Venn diagram that intersects. And then we will be in that intersection with them. And then when these shenanigans are now done, then when things are calm, people can now go back to electoral law and having fights in parliament that have nothing to do with who is going to be the president. Because obviously, the climate and the temperature are going to be very different. And then we can talk about honest electoral reform.
Dr. Witty, how do you talked about Dr. D, who is NASA strategist, so talking about suicidal if we go into war.
I think what Jubilee wants reassurance about is that if Uhuru wins and there are irregularities or illegalities that are perceived that could be proven, that they're just going to raise the threshold for throwing out an election. They're going to make it extremely difficult for an election to be thrown out. Because if you ask anybody who understands how elections are done, what happened on August 8th was a massive crime scene. Okay, you needed a legion of detectives, not a battery of lawyers, to basically come to court and show how it basically happened. And if you look at the time that the petition has to be filed, heard, and determined, there's no time to do all of that, to basically go and audit the entire process, and especially when IBCs are going to open the servers for you. So what Jubilee is basically going to say, is trying to say, and as Charles said, it might benefit someone else in the future. But again, when there are travesties and transgressions of the basic law, people are still going to complain, but now the bar has been raised so high that you basically cannot annul an election, even when you can see it. And the time there, if you look at the way our political parties are constituted, that investigation process is too expensive to bankrupt an entire nation, let alone a party, to basically come with the evidence, do all the investigations, poll station to poll station. Now, on the other hand, I think for NASA, what they're basically saying is you're basically going to face the hangman again. If you have IBC with all the things that went down still running the election. So it is a catch-22 for both of them. It's like, if we, and as the Chief Justice said, if elections are conducted once more, and these irregularities and illegalities still show up, I will throw the thing out. Joaquin Dungu's dissenting opinion was very elaborate and basically laid the foundation for what Jubilee now is saying, these are the absolute safeguards for this process going forward.
Okay.
So I think that's where the stalemate is.
The stalemate, somebody has distilled it. Tony Kongalo says, the issue stems from elections being bungled. How can we correct that? Everything else is sideshows.
I think I want to say two things.
And before you respond to that, also react to that. The election should be done according to the dictates of the Constitution as directed by the Supreme Court. How difficult is that, the pastoralist asks?
Yeah, I think I want to talk about two things. And the first is that you are confusing neutrality for objectivity. Neutrality means you don't take a position. And Kenyans are entitled to be neutral to the political parties. And they're also entitled under Article 38 of the Constitution to be part of a political party, to take part in its activities, to articulate its views. So both are legitimate positions. Objectivity doesn't mean neutrality. You can be a partisan and yet objective. Every day when I go to court as an advocate in an adversarial system, I have to take the side of either a plaintiff or a defendant, a complainant or an accused person. But it doesn't mean as an advocate that I should lose my objectivity. I have to counsel my client. When I go to court, I'm expected to uphold standards of ethics and integrity, not to lie to the court and so many other things. These are things we learn in our profession. So what I'm trying to say is that it is possible even for those partisans in Jubilee and in NASA who are pushing for certain reforms to push for reforms in an objective way and for reforms that will benefit Kenyans. And on this point, I want to say that my personal view is that the key reforms being proposed by NASA are driven by genuine desire to ensure free and fair elections. They are exaggerating. They are going beyond the minimum required. It's like they have taken a negotiating stance. But they really hope that they will end up with a minimum position that is beyond, lower than the reducible minimum, but which will secure free and fair elections. That is required by Article 1 of the Constitution on sovereignty. It's required by Article 81 and it's the Constitution. It's one of the fundamental pillars of our constitutional democracy. I also think that Jubilee, at least several of the people in Jubilee who are pushing for constitutional amendments, are driven by a genuine desire to uphold the integrity of constitutional institutions and processes, to avoid a constitutional crisis, to avoid a failure to hold valid elections within 60 days as ordered by the court, to avoid a situation of constitutional paralysis. And I think that because there are genuine concerns, some of those proposals, again, are also objective and for the good of this country. And therefore, it's not enough to just dismiss them. It's unfortunate that they couldn't do it in a bipartisan manner. My assumption is that if the elections do take place, bipartisanship will be recovered thereafter. And that before, because we have only 3 weeks to go, there may be some minimum amount of bipartisanship. But I think Kenyans need to also recognize that when you're in the middle of a football game and the score is 1-1 at halftime, you may not have so much space to go and start negotiating with the other side because you fear they may score you a goal in the second half. And that is where the two sides are. NASA and Jubilee are there. Okay. So we may be expecting a bit too much of them to forget about the fact that these guys just scored me an equalizer. I scored and they may score me in the second half. And that's why the spectators and the referee and umpire are better placed to mediate and moderate these demands, determine what is objective, and push the objective through. I have been accused of being overly optimistic, and as a Kenyan, I think we are at that time when if we are not overly optimistic, we are headed for the edge of the cliff. We are headed for collapse. And I think it's important that you have those optimistic people who have the vision of how things should be in the future, who are able to see the good in NASA, which is there, the good in Jubilee, which is there, but criticize where they are going above board, because both of them also have some mischief behind the amendments. Okay. Ensure that those two pillars of our constitutional democracy, free and fair elections that NASA is pushing for, constitutional processes and institutions having integrity, institutional integrity, which is what Jubilee is pushing for, are upheld within the next 3 weeks. If we do that, we will actually manage to negotiate this very difficult moment of apparent constitutional crisis and come out stronger on the other side.
Great. I think it's a good place to leave it, don't you think?
Yeah, maybe the last thing I will say is that for me it's exciting that everybody is so happy about electoral reform. It is also electoral reform to have a constitutional parliament, which is that there's a 2/3 gender rule that everybody has been ignoring. And if there was mass action and constitutional and parliamentary discussion about that as well, perhaps I would really believe in collective integrity.
The reviews are in for the panel in our conversation today. Brace yourselves.
Nobody can ever be ready.
Oh, wow. _M, a panel of angry beta intellectuals who believe NASA is a solution. The solution is not in the politicians, but in Kenyans.
How is that even true?
Where did they get that from?
Wow.
Continue.
Go on.
Okay, I like that you're like, go on. Okay, great. Lebo 82, the panel is a middle class panel, standing in the middle.
I'm not a middle class, I'm a public intellectual. I'm not in any class.
All right.
There's nothing
you can't classify me by money and
middle
consumption.
class, upper class, or lower class. If that's where your current economic status is, so long as you're
current
aspiring...
is a good word, because these things change.
Yes,
every
they
day.
do change. They do change.
According to the words of one wise sage.
What is middle class? Middle class is somebody who earns between $2 and $20 a day.
EF Lewis, nothing profound about the discussions. Just lofty ideals and revelry from panels who are alone away from dropping from middle class.
It's true. With this EF Lewis, I am truly, it's not even a lie.
Alone away.
And I'm not mocking him. Yes. Everybody truly is alone away from, I suppose it depends on the size of